It's rigged. The whole thing is rigged. You know, Michael Hudson calls it the financialization of the economy. all discretionary income after you pay your roof over your head and food to eat, all discretionary income goes to debt service. So how can the economy grow?
My money.
Money.
I get money from you.
Money in the bank.
Young money.
Money, 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 money.
It's a rich man's world.
I was a professor of economics. I was in the congressional staff. I was an editor at the Wall Street Journal, a columnist for Business Week and the Scripps Hour News Service. I was assistant secretary of the Treasury. I've been on corporate boards. I've run a water company, and so on.
You've got the T-shirt then, it's crazy times today, Paul, and I never get now. Is Paul Craig Roberts? Now, do people call you Craig, or I never get this right? Do people call you Paul Roberts or Paul Craig Roberts? Do people call you more Craig? How did that work?
Well, I had the same name as my father and grandfather, and in those days, families all lived in the same place. So if they said Paul, 3 people would answer. So they called me Craig. So I was Craig all of my life until I became an editor at the Wall Street Journal and was given a column, Political Economy, on the editorial page. And the copy editor came and said, Craig, do you have a middle name? I said, yes, Craig. He said, well, there's too much space. What's your first name? I said, Paul. Well, that turned me into Paul. Because everyone's used to calling you by your first name. So I'm at the situation where even high school classmates call me Paul. But my readers call me PCR.
PCR, yeah.
And I tell them, I said, that's the name of that COVID test that produces false positives. And I don't want to have credit for that. So I guess I'm kind of stuck with Paul. I owe that to the copy editor at the Wall Street Journal. He renamed me late in my career.
That's when who was the family that owned it before? Who was the family that owned?
Well, I knew, but I've forgotten. It was too long ago.
Yeah, before Rupert Murdoch bought it. I forget who the family was, but in any event,
when the family owned it, it was independent, and so the paper had an independent voice. They didn't interfere with us, and but now, of course, it's just another part of the conglomeration of concentrated media in a few hands. And all of the American media has lost its independence. There's literally no independence in the American media because 90% of it is now owned by 6 mega companies.
Yeah, 6 of them, yeah.
So the media is no longer a media. It's a propaganda ministry for the ruling elites.
Are we turning into the Soviet Union, Paul?
Something worse, actually, because the Soviets weren't as gullible as the Americans. They understood that the media was speaking for the government and learned to read through the lines, and the media was not as willing a servant of the government as the American media is a servant of the ruling interests. So the media and the Soviet media could let things out between the lines, and as the population was far more aware, the American population is largely insouciant. And they were so skeptical of the official explanations that they could arrive at an independent view. In the United States, official explanations are defended, And a lot of Americans, if you try to tell them what's going on, they just get offended. Well, that's not what CNN said. Well, I heard on NPR, So Americans are just very slow on the uptake compared to the Soviets. And that's why the ruling interest can get away with so much.
You mentioned that. It's funny is that I was in Chicago at a big event with a celebrity who invited me. I'm not going to get into him with any event. I was there with my son. I was in Chicago. And it was in the summertime. It was beautiful, and we're at the one of the museums or whatever. And this woman, she said, "You're a handsome guy, and you're with your son." I said, "Well, I'm a writer." She said, "What do you write about?" "Write about economics and how like pensions are highly unfunded." And this woman said, "We're teachers." They wanted to attack him. He said, "That's not true. We got all these promises." But people are just they're so dumbed down now, Paul, aren't they?
Yeah, they have a lot of trust in authorities. Like they trust the public health people, like NIH, CDC. They trust all the COVID propaganda. If you tell them the Russians are doing something bad, they'll believe that. Whatever you tell them. It's just as hard to talk to some conservative patriots about the facts as it is to talk to the crazy left wing.
Yeah.
Because the left wing knows what it thinks, and some of the super patriots, they believe all the propaganda that supports wars because they think that's patriotic. And you point out that, these wars are really, they've been orchestrated, and we've been fed a bunch of false information, like non-existent weapons of mass destruction. And, don't you think we need to catch on? They'll just get, you're not patriotic. We have to support the troops. Well, support what? Support interest groups misusing the troops? Why do you want to do that? But anyhow.
Yeah. Now, I got a question for you, Paul. Now, obviously you're you're retired, but you're probably more busier than ever, and you're well known, and you seem to have things taken care of from a financial perspective or whatever. But what motivates you to keep speaking out the truth? I mean, people don't like it that you're speaking out the truth. It's like my friend Gerald Salente, But you do speak the truth, and every time I do an interview, everyone downloads it all around the globe. So, what motivates you? You believe in God, your kids, your grandkids. What keeps you going?
I believe in truth. I don't think a country can exist without it. When you destroy truth, you destroy all prospect of civil liberty, all prospect of controlling government. The people become serfs and slaves when you destroy truth. If we blame the government, but the government itself is controlled or certainly highly influenced by private interest groups. There are many powerful interest groups. The military security complex. President Eisenhower warned us about it.
He warned it,
yeah. Kennedy warned us about it. John Kennedy warned us about it. They killed him before he could do anything about it. And we have other powerful interest groups like the pharmaceutical companies. They have tremendous influence over the public health authorities because they make such a contribution to the budget. There's a revolving door between NIH, CDC, and Big Pharma. These kinds of influences are everywhere in the government. I'll just give you two examples, but there are many. And so when you you basically have the government essentially privatized, serving interest groups that are more powerful than the government. I mean, look at Trump. Trump has had 4 years in office. He's not been able to do anything. Why? Because he's been constantly on the defensive with false charges. Russiagate. What was Russiagate? Where did that come from? It came because Trump said, I'm going to reduce tensions with Russia. They're dangerous tensions. We don't need them. Moreover, we need to be doing business and so on. Well, that was a threat to the budget and power of the CIA, the Pentagon, the whole military security complex, the mass number of private defense contractors. They all said, hell, he's going to take away our enemy that justifies the money in the budget. And so who led this? The CIA. Don't you remember Brennan? Starts accusing him of being a Russian agent, unpatriotic. Get him out of office. Well, he's had these kinds of charges ever since, even before he got in, during the campaign in 2016. And now they're getting more charges against him. And they get more and more ridiculous. This Kamala person is trying to drag up again, the Russians are paying the Taliban to kill American troops.
There's no validity.
And Trump didn't do anything about it. Well, this is ridiculous. We've been over there in their country for almost 20 years, killing women and children and farmers and just tearing the place to pieces. They don't need any Russians to bribe them to shoot our soldiers. This is ridiculous. We were in a war with them. What do they need bribes for? From the Russians. And yet, a vice president candidate, in fact, everybody knows she's the one that's running for president because Biden is gaga. So they got somebody this stupid, and they want them, the president, the vice president, too stupid to understand we're at war with the people, and people we're at war with don't need any Russian bribes to kill us. It's astounding. The level of just utter total stupidity, and it goes unremarked. I've never heard anyone in the media ask any of the people who are saying, Trump didn't do anything about Russia paying the Taliban to shoot our soldiers. No one has ever asked, why in the world would they need to do that?
I want to kind of hit on some economic issues, and with all the money printing going on now, Paul, which is, hopefully we don't end up in like the Weimar Republic. Redfin, which is a national real estate organization, yesterday announced, Paul, the median price of a home in America is $320,000. Okay, and it went up 14%. Housing went up 14% in 1 year, and they're saying there's no inflation. I mean. And young people, I know some young people who have saved money. They can't. I live in New Hampshire, beautiful area, but no one can afford a home around here. I mean, and they say the Fed says that there's no inflation. Isn't it a bunch of BS? What do you think?
Of course. Well, this goes back to the Clinton administration, to the Boston Commission. The Boston Commission reconfigured how they measure inflation because they didn't want to pay cost of living adjustments to Social Security recipients. They were all scared, the deficit. So we have to hide inflation. So what they did, two things that hid inflation, the way they reconstructed the index. If a price of something in the index went up, they just threw it out of the index and stuck something cheaper in. That was one of, and they still do this. So if the price of filet mignon goes up, they throw that out and they'll stick in ribeye steak. The price of ribeye steak goes up, they throw that out and stick in round steak. If And then the other thing they do is, if the price of something goes up, they say, no, that's not a price rise, that's a quality improvement. Well, there are quality improvements, but they apply this so widely that all kinds of things that aren't quality improvements become quality improvements. Moreover, the consumer still has to pay the price, so it's still a higher price. You see? So the inflation numbers, the official inflation numbers, have been meaningless for years. You know, John Williams.
Oh, he's a great guy. I want to interview him. He's a great guy. He did amazing research.
Inflation rates more like double digit. Now, so when they monkey with economic indicators, you see the inflation used to measure a constant the cost of a constant standard of living. So everything that was in the basket weighted. If some price went up, then that meant the cost of living went up. So they were measuring the cost of a constant standard of living. Now what they're measuring is the cost of a falling standard of living. Because every time something in there goes up, they throw it out and put in something inferior. So by changing the basket of goods, in the old way, you didn't change the basket of goods. You just let the prices change. Well, in the new way of doing it, the basket of goods isn't constant. They throw things out, the price goes up on, and put a substitute in. It's cheaper. Well, so the new inflation measure measures the cost of a falling standard of living.
Yeah, and when did they change the core inflation? That when I understood that, because with core inflation they exclude energy and food. Am I correct? They exclude those two items. And any young family, anyone who has to drive or running a farm or heat a home or whatever, energy and food are always two huge items. They exclude them. Am I correct?
Yeah, to exclude anything is false. In fact, the whole idea of core inflation, I think what this means is, there's some inflation that's just core, and we can't do anything about that, so we're not measuring that part. So, you know, it's just another trick they use to hold the measure down, because then they don't have to look. You can think of all kinds of lobby groups that came up with this idea. Suppose you're the military security complex, you want a bigger budget, but God, inflation's raging, and the Social Security cost of living is going to use up all the money. We're not going to have a bigger Pentagon budget, so they'll come up with something like this. You see what I'm saying? Or the agricultural companies getting subsidies for what's the stuff they add to our gasoline now?
Ethanol. Yeah.
Ethanol. You know, they get all subsidies for this. They say, oh my gosh, the Social Security costs so much, they'll cut ethanol subsidies. So they'll come up with the idea of how we can understate inflation and hold down Social Security. So everybody that's living off the budget has an interest in holding down Social Security cost of living adjustments. So, you know, in the Social Security people, it's not a very powerful lobby. They're just not. They can't come up to politicians and say, here's a few $100,000 in campaign contributions, or here's $1 million, or anything like that. The pharmaceuticals can, the military security complex can, the big commercial agricultural can, they can. And so that's, but all the old people in Social Security can't. So they don't get any attention. They get a measure of their cost of living, which is false, a huge understatement.
I have a question for you, Paul. I mean, and this is I came into this conclusion, but I want to see what your thoughts on it. We're kind of turning into a banana republic of sorts, aren't we? I mean, when you start looking at it, I mean, I love this country. Don't get me. I love where I live. Fortunately, I've traveled around the world, and I still love America. And I love my friends and my family. But this country is turning into a banana republic. Was it 40% of the population can't come up with like $400? If you look at, the Federal Reserve came out with these statistics that the top 1% of the population owns 53% of the stocks, and the bottom 10%, the other 10% owns another 35%, and then 90% only gets 12% of the economic or the equities. I mean,
that much.
Even time off and things like that. Do you realize that Mexico has more legal holidays and mandated time off than the U.S. now? Are we kind of turning into a banana republic, Paul? I mean, I don't get me wrong. I love this country, but in many ways we are. What do you think?
Well, we are deindustrializing ourselves. See, once they turned a blind eye to jobs offshoring,
Yeah.
We started becoming a third world country.
Yeah.
If you don't have strong manufacturing, you don't have strong research and development, you don't have strong design, you don't have the ladders of upward mobility that let people rise up into the middle class, you don't have strong tax base for cities, counties, states, or the federal government. So the minute the Soviet Union collapsed,
Yeah.
and China and India changed their attitude toward foreign capital, American firms started moving their plant to Asia, to China especially, and moving tradable professional skills like software engineering to India, so that all of a sudden, all the kids who had gone to school and taken engineering degrees and software engineering degrees, there's no jobs. And all of a sudden, cities and states are having trouble funding their pensions. And the tax base is drying up, and so on and so on. And some of the cities that were so powerful, American cities, are ruins. Some of them look like they've been bombed, So this was the product of our own policy. It was a confusion of corporate interests with free trade. You see, the whole theory of free trade is based on comparative advantage, and comparative advantage means your capital stays at home and finds its most advantageous use. And then the products from most advantageous use of your own capital, they're sold abroad to pay for the products of other countries' most advantageous use. But when you move your capital and your manufacturing capacity out of the country, this has nothing to do with free trade or comparative advantage. This is absolute advantage. And the whole theory of free trade says absolute advantage destroys the premise of free trade. But it's what we've been following. It's when you close down a plant in a city, then aggregate demand of the population of that city is shrunk. Now, when all this was happening, I was pointing it out, and all the economists in the Ivy League schools, they said, "Oh no, we're going to have even better jobs. These are old, dirty fingernail jobs. We don't need these dirty fingernail jobs. We're going to have better jobs." And so all the people losing their manufacturing jobs are going to be much better, worse off. And I kept saying, well, what are these jobs? Where are they? What are they? Where are they? Never got an answer. And of course, they're not there. What they are is a part-time employment stocking shelves in Walmart. And in the absence of these jobs is the reason such a high percentage of college-educated youth still live at home with their parents because they can't get a job good enough to support an independent existence. Well, all the economists who lied about this, none of them have been held responsible. None of them. No, I mean, here you have a major accountability problem. No one has held them accountable except me. And so
For me.
you see what I'm saying? So that's just, if we are a banana republic, it's because we are ending up with an economy that's a banana republic. It's got almost nothing to do with the federal debt. The thing that so many conservatives don't understand is that if a country's debt is denominated in its own currency, you can always pay it off, just print some money. So the massive federal debt is not a threat to Washington or to the government or to the country. If people say, oh, what would happen if the Chinese decided to dump their $1 trillion in bonds? Oh, we'd be ruined. No, we wouldn't. The Fed would just print the money and buy them. The question is, when the Chinese get the $1 trillion of dollars in exchange for the bonds, if they dump those dollars, what happens? Because we can't print foreign currencies with which to buy the dollar. So it's not the debt that's the problem. It's the dollar can become a problem. People decide, oh, we don't want to hold dollars to the same extent we have in the past. The dollar value goes down. And then everything you import goes up. You see, the main cause of inflation is not printing money. You know, this monetary economists have taught all my life that, oh, you print money, you get inflation. They always use the German hyperinflation. But what caused the German hyperinflation was the collapse of the mark. All kinds of money came into Germany. And then something happened and it all was pulled out. And so the value of the mark collapsed. So when the value of the currency collapsed, all the prices went up. That's the main cause of inflation. Now, if it wasn't, not even the monkeying around with the inflation index that I described earlier in our conversation, not even that could hide the inflation. With all the money that's been, or the trillions of dollars, the years of quantitative easing, and now the trillions for the COVID bailout from the lockdowns. If printing money caused inflation, we would already be in a hyperinflation. Where is it? Where is the hyperinflation? You know, the Federal Reserve has been printing money by the trillions. Where's the hyperinflation? Because it hasn't hit the dollar. And so when it does hit the dollar, or if and when, that's when you'll see the hyperinflation. The day people say, oh, we don't trust the dollar anymore.
And that's my big worry.
But you see, what is their alternative? Do they trust the yen? Do they trust the euro? Do they trust the British pound? Where are they going to flee? What currency are they going to flee into? The tiny Swiss currency? It ain't big enough. So unless they flee into the Chinese currency, where are they going to go? Gold and silver. Well, when they do that to any great extent, and the authorities get worried, they just beat the price down. You know, myself and Dave Cranston have explained over and over and over how the price of gold is not determined in the physical market. It's determined in the futures market. And in the futures market, you can sell short without having to have the gold.
Yeah, you do naked shorts, right?
Naked shorts, and they've used naked shorts to hold the gold down, to hold the gold down, to hold the gold down. And so as long as they can do that, then it's kind of hard for the dollar to lose. So, because what's the alternative? Again, what's the alternative? Are people going to rush into China when allegedly they're our enemy and there's a trade war and blah, blah, and on and on? Would you, if you were an American billionaire, would you move your holdings to China? Probably not. So, you know, in a way, the dollar's just protected by the fact that that's what people are used to. They're accustomed to this.
But, remember there's a guy named Stephen Roach. I don't know if you remember. He used to be the head of Morgan Stanley in Asia, pretty well-known guy. And now he's a teacher at Yale. And believe me, I believe the Ivy League is kind of more or less a vocational school for Wall Street at this point. But he came out with something that, which I thought was really important, is that there's virtually no savings. The savings, Paul, is dropping like a rock in this country. Where if you look at the Poles, the Irish, even the French, even the Italians, everyone else is saving. And I think we're at maybe negative savings, again, just like in 2007, 2008. Isn't one of the real problems that we're not, for economics, we're not warehousing capital?
Well, look, there's no savings for these reasons, both business savings and personal savings. The American people don't earn enough to save anything. In fact, most of them are living on their credit card, and all they can do is pay the minimum payment. So every year, every month, their credit card balance goes up. So when you're drowning in debt, you can't save. Now, what do the businesses do with their savings? They use it to buy back the stock. We've had, this isn't an opinion. This is a fact. It's been documented. The use of business earnings and borrowings. Not only do they use all their profits to buy back their stock, they go borrowing money to buy back their stock. The company is being decapitalized in order to boost the bonus payments of the executives and the board. This has been going on for years. So, most of the compensation of executives and board members is bonus based. So how do you get the bonus? A stock share goes up.
You got to get the price.
Yeah. Everything is focused short term. Get the stock share up. So business savings has gone in driving up stock prices, and personal savings, they're not there because people are so indebted. The real problem is the private debt level. Individuals, you see, when the offshoring of jobs began, it impacted negatively on aggregate consumer demand. Because if you got a $25 an hour manufacturing job and that drops to an $8 or $9 Walmart job, your income is going way down. And therefore your discretionary income, your ability to purchase things is going way down. So when this hit the economy, Alan Greenspan was at the Fed. He said, I know what we'll do. We'll substitute an increase in consumer debt for the missing growth in consumer income. So they had a great expansion in consumer debt. Well, that can go on only so long, because at some point you can't service any more debt. And that's at the point where they are now. And the reason for the huge growth in the inequality of income and wealth in the United States is the offshoring of the jobs and the stock buybacks, as well, of course, as the Fed's quantitative easing. Where all that money went, one reason it didn't cause any inflation to speak of is it inflated stock and bond prices. So the inflation we got was in stock and bond prices and real estate prices. It didn't go into consumer prices. All the money the Fed created went into the stock market, pushed up stock prices. That's why we have all these absurd PE ratios. And how do you explain otherwise such high stock prices when there's no place for them to invest their earnings except their own shares? You see, if this was a growth economy, all those earnings would be going into an expansion of the business. And the borrowings would be going into expansion of the business so that the rising revenues would service the debt. Instead, the borrowings and the earnings go into buying back their own shares. Well, that tells you the company itself doesn't see any future.
But it's almost, it's criminal at this point, Paul. I mean, because I guess, I actually had the guy, the economist, who's, I guess, stock buybacks were illegal or something like that prior to '82, and it wasn't really that big of a deal, but now with low interest rates where they're borrowing money. And if you look at really the real blunders, you look at the airlines, what did they bought back 50 billion of stock, and then Boeing bought like 20 back, and then GE blew 24 billion, and everyone crashed. I mean, should there be a limit on stock buybacks, Paul? I mean, it's not going to any productive use.
Well, I don't really know why executives and boards are allowed to decapitalize the companies for which they have fiduciary responsibility merely in order to push up their own pay. See, it shows how complete control interest groups have over government policy. I regard it as more than criminal. In other words, the executives and the boards, which are supposed to be looking after the shareholders' interests, are decapitalizing the company to reward themselves. Well, that's theft. They might as well just have their hand in the tiller. And nothing is said about, oh, this is free trade. Oh, we can't have the government interfere with business. Oh, no, we mustn't have. That would be socialism. So as long as people think like that, this will continue.
Yeah, so, yeah, because I look at, I always pick on GE, you know, and GE was the largest industrial company in the world, Paul, about 20 years ago in 2000, had a $600 billion market cap. And I think, what is it today? Maybe, who knows what it is today, maybe 59 billion, whatever. But they got 15 billion in long-term care liabilities off their old insurance business. They've got pension liabilities of 21 billion. They got executive pensions of 7 billion. And there's a lot more other crap I can't even think of. And it almost has a negative net worth. I mean, how long can this go on? Any thoughts on that?
It goes on until they can't service their debt.
And then
even then, the Fed will come in and bail them out. There's not, as far as I can tell, there's not much consequences anymore for bad behavior unless the other participants in your group decide to do you in. Like, you know, remember during the financial crisis in, what was it, '08?
Yeah.
The Fed saved everybody, but who was it they let go?
Lehman. Lehman go.
Lehman, yeah. Lehman went
after
Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns too, I think. But Lehman, okay. So somebody up there at Goldman Sachs decided they'd had enough of Lehman butter. And so everybody got bailed out but Lehman. Well, why? I mean, why not bail them out too? Why were they excluded? You have to say the group decided they didn't want, or Goldman Sachs, somebody decided they didn't want Lehman Brothers around anymore. And so, everybody gets bailed out but them. There's no other explanation. I mean, if the Fed was going to save AIG and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and all the rest of them, why not also save Lehman Brothers? It would have been the smallest amount of money. So, you see, these things don't get asked or answered either. So you figure that somebody had a vendetta on Lehman Brothers.
I think just Dick Bull just pissed some of these guys off. I think it was just a personality thing. That was just my take on it. But Bull, all these guys walked out, and guess what, Paul? I'm doing the research. Lehman dumped its whole pension, 22,000 employees, the pension on the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, and they also gave their ex-employees a health savings credit, which I had no idea about, which gave a subsidy for everyone's health insurance until they were like, I don't know, age 62 or 63. I was like, I never knew that, but it's all true. So even though they threw Lehman on the bus, they bailed out the pension benefit guarantee. The PBGC did, which is backed by us, and they gave them a health care credit. But it's incredible. There's a guy, you ever heard of Charles Hugh Smithy, Up Two Minds? He has a website, very bright guy. And has corruption become like are we like Rome now? Is like corruption kind of the way of the world now? I mean, it's so accepted.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's greed, corruption. It used to be you had to look yourself in the mirror. And what that meant was you had to have treated everybody right. Well, today, you can't look yourself in the mirror unless you rip somebody off. And so the whole meaning of looking yourself in the mirror has changed. And so, yeah, it's a situation of just greed and all of the deregulation, that is the meaningful regulation against monopoly. The repeal of Glass-Steagall was the whole.
That was the biggie, wasn't it? Yeah, and Bill Clinton, yeah.
The cause of the financial crisis was the repeal of and it's the cause for the ongoing potential for financial crisis any minute. But the repeal of it served banking interests. And banking interests prevailed over common sense, fact, and traditional American regulatory practice. Also, there are endless examples of this. For example, the concentration of the media in the Clinton regime. The American media consisted of several thousand different newspapers, radio stations. The TV networks were independent, all of this. So there was at least the possibility of varied voices, varied reporting. But once they're concentrated in six hands, it's essentially a monopoly. And they all speak with one voice. Any newspaper you pick up, it says the same thing. Any TV talking head program you listen to, they say the same thing. If you listen to NPR, they say the same thing CNN says. Same thing MSNBC, the Washington Post, the New York Times. They all say the same thing. They have the exact same explanation for everything, whether it's Russiagate, Peachgate, Ukraine, whatever it is, or COVID, or it's all the same explanation. So there's no diversity. It's not possible to have diversity.
You know what I found out from my son, who's in the public relations business? For every reporter, Paul, there's 5 like public relations people. He said, "Yeah, Dad, it's correct." He says, "Yeah," and my son's involved with this. He says, "Yeah, there's 5 spin doctors, if you will, for every reporter now." And so it's crazy.
Well, the reporters themselves are spin doctors. By now, all reporters and all editors know what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot report. If they don't, they're fired. They all know that. They all know that. When I look at the people in media today, when I was at the Wall Street Journal, we wouldn't have considered hiring any of these people. They have no integrity, no honesty. They know nothing. They read scripts handed to them. They don't report on anything. They're handed an explanation. And the same thing is true throughout Europe. We have that book bought journalism by the German editor says there's not a significant journalist anywhere in Europe that's not on the CIA's payroll. It was a bestseller in Germany, sold out. There was going to be an English edition and it got killed. I think now it's managed to come out. Somebody got it out finally, but long after it was in the news, you see. So what do you do if for example, the Sherman Antitrust Act is a dead letter law. It's not enforced. There are all kinds of concentrations everywhere. Look at social media. Look at Google. These are huge concentrations, and they're abusing their power. You know, expert medical personnel who have a take on the COVID situation different from the official line. If they post anything on Twitter or Facebook, it's immediately taken down. So there's no possibility of any public debate, any discussion, any alternative explanation is simply killed. Google does this to people. If you've got a website and it's putting out information different from the official explanation, all of a sudden Google searches don't turn you up.
It's happened to me. Yeah.
So they, when you have monopoly, you control information. And when you can flush things down the memory hole, which is what Facebook and Twitter do every day, it's just like George Orwell. It's just like 1984. Up in the memory hole. That's not permissible. There it goes. This is now common practice. This is common practice of Facebook. It's a common practice of Google. It's a common practice of Twitter. So everything, not just the print and TV media, but the internet, serves, present everything in one voice. There's no dissent. There's no challenge. There's no alternative explanation. There's only the official explanation. Well, the Soviet media was never this bad, ever.
Well, you know, I've a friend of mine and his girlfriend, their parents, they're actually from the Soviet Union, you know, and they're very bright scientists, and they emigrated, you know, Jewish scientists, very nice people. But they're like, hey, we've kind of seen this movie before, you know, what they see going on now, and they're just buying, you know, investing in education and hard assets and real estate and the whole thing, because they've seen this before. They're not surprised what's going on, you know? Question for you. So what deregulation too? I mean, one of the things which you realize about the whole economy is all debt-based now. And if you study Mesopotamia like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, that the maximum they could charge interest on a loan was like 10% in silver and 30% in barley. But now, what's the interest rate you can charge in America? There is no maximum, okay? And if they shut you down in the U.S., you can set up something in the Virgin Islands or the Cayman Islands or whatever. I mean, and if you study religions and things like that, they've all maintained that you should have like charge reasonable interest. You know, the Christianity says you should charge a reasonable amount of interest. Catholicism, the same thing. The Jewish religion, you're not supposed to charge interest to your neighbor. Muslim, Islam, you're not supposed to charge any interest at all. But now we charge whatever you can get away with. I mean, where do we? It was
Barry. We've already said there's no accountability. Look, the bank will pay you less than 1% on your deposit with the bank, but they'll charge you 20% on your credit card. If you miss a payment, they'll charge you 29% or 30%. So if there's no inflation, as the official explanation is, what's the justification for a 20% inflation rate, interest rate on a credit card?
Yes.
You see, oh, there's no inflation. Look how low interest rates are. Well, they're low in terms of what they'll pay a saver, but they're extremely high on a debtor. So yeah, it's rigged. The whole thing is rigged. You know, Michael Hudson calls it the financialization of the economy. all discretionary income after you pay your roof over your head and food to eat, all discretionary income goes to debt service. So how can the economy grow? You can't. For a while, as I said earlier, Alan Greenspan got it growing by substituting debt for missing growth and income. But when you get everybody so indebted, they can't even raise $400 cash, they can't take any more debt. And right now, you've got people who cannot pay down their credit card balance. They can only pay the minimum payment. And so the balance keeps rising. So the real trouble in the United States is the extraordinary indebtedness of the population, not the government, not even the business, but because the businesses can get bailed out, but people don't get bailed out. So when you look at the debt level, okay, you got a mortgage debt, you got car payments, you got student loan payments, you got credit card payments, you don't have any money left. So the debt problem in the United States is the consumer debt. It's killing aggregate demand. It kills the ability of the population to support an increase in output because they got any money to buy it with.
And you know what amazed me, Paul, about this so much? You know who, and I did the research, people don't realize, and I'll say this now, and the student loan debt was essentially, they changed student loan debt, students into indentured servants, and who was the shepherd of the 2005 bill, Bankruptcy Protection Bill, Consumer Protection Act? Who was the shepherd? Joseph Biden, okay? Joseph Biden, okay? And I can't believe no one is talking about this.
Well, because you see now, all of them up there are servants of one interest group or another, or of several interest groups that fund their campaigns. And if you don't serve the interest groups, you don't have any campaign money to get reelected on. Now, there used to be countervailing power because the Republicans served business interests. So the business funded Republicans. The Democrats served the working class. So the unions funded the Democrats. So you had two parties representing different interests, and that produced a balance, compromise.
Yeah.
Well, when you had, after offshoring, it destroyed the unions. There's not any manufacturing jobs. There's not any manufacturing unions. There's not any manufacturing towns. The unions are destroyed. The only unions left are public sector unions, like the postal union. So the Democrats then had to go to the same people that fund the Republicans. It started with the Clintons. So now you have both parties funded by the same interest groups. This is why they say it's one party with two heads. And it has stopped there's no countervailing power. There's nothing to countervail against the business interest groups. There's no unions. There's nobody that represents the working class. Remember, Hillary is a Democrat. How did she define the working class? Trump deplorables. So when the Democratic Party itself looks at the working class as the deplorables, racist, white people, there's no balance in the system. And the working class knows this. I remember driving through poor sections in 2016 during the campaign that always would have had Democrat signs. There wasn't a single sign for Hillary. They were all for Trump. If you do the same thing today, you see the same thing. Go drive through areas where people are living in rundown trailers, Trump signs. Well, historically, this makes no sense. You go drive through all the rich areas in California, and oh, Biden signs.
Oh yeah.
So you now have a situation where the Republican Party is supported by the working class, or the remnants of it. The Democrats got all the rich people.
Yeah, and that's why
Just look at Silicon Valley's campaign contributions. You won't find any Trump people there.
Well, the Center for Responsive Politics, the open secrets, 56% of the money from Wall Street went to the Democratic Party.
I would expect more than that, yeah. So, what do you do in this type of situation, particularly when the population has no source of information except the internet, and they don't know where to look? Because the internet's full of nonsense too, just like the press and TV and NPR. In fact, there are all kinds of internet sites that are CIA fronts, State Department fronts, National Endowment for Humanity front, Israeli fronts. It's full of them. They're full of sites, and their whole function is to put out so much BS that nobody knows what's true and what isn't. The part of the internet that's truthful is very small.
Well, what keeps you going? The truth, pursuit of the truth, Paul?
Well, something to do. At least you can look. If I was born in these days, I probably wouldn't know the truth meant anything. A lot of people don't think there's any such thing, and so why should they be concerned? Truth is just whatever serves you. There's transgender truth, there's homosexual truth, there's straight truth, there's every kind of truth. And so the very concept of truth is being destroyed. The notion that there's an independent truth and that we have the ability to find it, that's disappearing. It's no longer present in the universities. I mean, it's even eroding in science. It's certainly not present in psychology or sociology or anthropology or the humanities. There's no concept of truth. It's all identity politics. The other thing that people don't understand, Barry, in the old days, the Marxists took the side of the working class.
Yeah.
And the working class were the good people, and the capitalists were the bad people, or the bourgeoisie, the capitalists. They were the bad people. Well, today, in identity politics, it's the white working class that are the bad people because they oppress the transgendered, the homosexuals, the blacks, the women. So the whole definition of who's good and bad is now white people are the cause of oppression. And white people voted for Trump, and that's why they say he's a fascist. So people haven't caught on to this. It's no longer the left-wing champions the working class. They hate the working class because that's the white working class, the Trump deplorables. We're for all the people the white people suppress, the poor blacks, the transgendered, and all the oppressed people. So that way of redoing it has really altered the whole political understanding. I mean, that's why the Democrats are running Kamala. She's a perfect example of identity politics. She absolutely hates white people. Really, she is just, it's systemic hatred of white people. And that's what you see in Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and most of those are white people. It's a self-hate. If you look at all of the films and the videos of the riots and all that, these are largely white people. If you look at an Antifa rally, it's largely white people. You look at BLM, it's largely white people.
Yeah, you do.
And it's a form of self-hate. They've been teaching this in universities and now even in the public schools for decades. That, oh, white people are evil, they caused slavery, they're colonialism, they oppressed third world countries, and this is all you learn. See, it's now taken over Oxford and Cambridge. They're literally anti-British, anti-white. They even take down statues of the most famous scientists and all that because, oh, he was white, he must have been racist. And people don't pay any attention to this. They think it's some kind of aberration or something, or some kind of just something that doesn't really mean anything. So when you get that kind of mix, you can see there's no kind of reality based on any kind of factual basis. You know, the African slave trade originated in Africa. It was the Black King of Dahomey. It was his slave wars. The tribes fought each other for slaves. It was a status symbol to have slaves. And Dahomey tended to come out on top. They ended up being the superpower of the slave warriors. Well, when they got more slaves than they could support, in other words, their status symbol became a burden, they started selling them to the Arabs. And then years later, they started selling them to the European sea captains who had found a market in the new lands, North and South America, where there were all kinds of resources and no labor force. Well, the whites weren't responsible for this. All this came from the Black King of Dahomey. They were his slaves. He sold them. And you can't find this anywhere in Black studies. It's all known, documented. Carl Polanyi wrote the classic book on it, Dahomey and the Slave Trade. You can't even find the book anymore. Or if you do, they want $2,000 or $3,000 for a copy. So when you live in a world of just complete, total disinformation, how can you know what to do? And this same kind of disinformation affects the policymakers. They don't have good information either. So when you want to talk about collapse, you see it's far more than the government debt. The government debt is the least part of it. The whole concept of truth is in collapse. Factual evidence, oh, that's racist. Facts, no, that serves white people. If you prove to them something, then they just say, well, that proves it's racist because you're blaming the Black King of Dahomey and not yourself. So you see what I'm saying? Truth is becoming ineffectual.
I agree.
Every day, truth becomes less effectual.
But you got to keep going, though. I don't know how your parents were, but my father always taught me, Paul, you leave something better than the way you found it, and I always speak the truth no matter what. And you know, I'm so grateful for that. You know, and I sleep at night. I mean, I don't know what your folks did, but
Barry, you're talking about us, people of our generation. They're not taught that anymore. It's not what they're taught anymore. When we're gone, the whole concept of truth will be gone. The whole concept of leaving things better will be gone. What they mean now by leaving things better is better for me, not for us. There's no notion of in any way sacrificing your current needs for a better future for everybody. That's just not there. So you're talking about you your parents and me and my parents, and that's the way we were, yes. And that's probably why we're interested in truth and try to tell the truth. But that's not taught anymore. That is a characteristic of the population that is being killed by the passage of time. And the more people like of our generation, we die, the whole concept of truth is dying. Truth as a independent thing that you search for to find. That's what I mean. There'll always be somebody claiming the truth is what serves his interest. And that's what you see now. Truth is what serves my interest. Oh, what can I beat Trump up with? Oh, God, no, he didn't stop the Russians from paying bribes to the Taliban to kill our soldiers. Now, what kind of truth is, I mean, how stupid can you be to ever think like that? But it shows you got no concept of truth and no respect for truth. But this serves your interest. So you can say something is totally absurd because it's a way of criticizing somebody you want to get out of your way. So these are the serious problems. It's not the federal debt. I mean, I don't think we need a federal debt, but it's not what's tearing us apart.
So what are you working on? You working on any new books now, Paul, or anything like that? Or any new projects?
You know, just to deal with current affairs is a full-time job. My publisher wants me to write another book. People in Europe who have independent publishing stuff want me to write a book. People want me to write memoirs. That takes a huge amount of time and effort. The last 3 books I wrote, basically 2 of them were just collections of columns that I kind of rewrote and put together. One of them was a book. They just take a tremendous amount of time, and it's getting harder and harder to get good information, despite the internet. And so just to keep my, I have this website.
Yes, PaulCraigRoberts.org, right?
Yeah.
And your thing is Institute for Peace. Am I correct? That's your baby, right?
To keep that fed, it's a full-time job. Yeah, a couple of years ago, I don't know how many years it was now. I guess it's been quite a number. I had enough. I resigned all my syndicated columns, and got out of them, and said, "Okay, I've had enough." I got about 5,000 emails, people giving me fits. "You SOB, why are you deserting us?" And some were nice, some were rude, some said, "Please reconsider." And so I got thinking, I said, so then I wrote them all back and said, "Okay, look, if I start a website, will you support it?" They said, yes, yes, yes. So that's how the website came into existence. And they still do, which is why I continue it. Now, the day they don't, I'm not going to do it. Because if nobody's interested, why should I be bothering? But as long as they are, and they show it in their support, I'm going to keep going. I'd rather be doing other things. But that's my explanation.
Well,
it's not easy to like the people who are lying all the time and aren't ashamed of it.
no, I know, but you're a national treasure, Paul. And I had the benefit to interview Noam Chomsky the other week, a couple weeks ago. You're familiar with Chomsky?
Yeah.
And he's about as left as you can go, but he's got like you, he's got a good heart though. He understands what's going on. So you're a national treasure. So just keep going, man, and just keep pushing back the frontiers of ignorance.
Well, you can only do it as long as people want to hear it.
He counted on America to be passive. He counted wrong.